welcome everybody. My name is Eickhoff, and I'm here to present the dark side, fundamentally speaking. So what's my background? I'm actually an MD by background, then spent some time in research, spent some time as a clinician, as a psychiatrist, and for the last roughly 10 years, I'm now back in neuroscience, mainly computational stuff, functional imaging, and also translational work. So why this session and why the provocative title? Well, if you look at the last couple of years at OHBM, open science is a big topic. And everybody was very happy to agree that this is the way forward. That's great, and I completely agree. Yet, there is some form of, let's say, non-consideration in there. I make a very simple and straightforward point. If you are a computer scientist working in a computational neuroscience lab, you love data, you want data. And the more data you can download, the better. Because you have the infrastructure to process the data, you just need the actual data. Now, what happens if you're a junior doctor? You spend weeks, you spend months recruiting patients, going to the wards, talking to them, trying to convince them. You're dealing with the MRI technicians, you're dealing with machines, you spend, or your PI spends money to actually get the scanner access. And after 2 or 3 years of work, you finally got your sample of 40 patients and 40 controls. Now, this, you hope, was the last time you need to do it. You just need to milk the data now, massage it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and get your research degree. And once you have that degree, a PhD or a PD in Germany, that's all you need. You're going off to private practice, and that's it. So you spent the 3 years to gain the capital that you then need to publish a bunch of papers, and you're off. And then comes this computer scientist and says, you're a morally wrong person. You are unethical, and you are a really bad guy if you don't immediately and fully give me your data. Believe me, I can process it better, quicker, and nicer than you could ever do it. So for the good of the world, for the good of the science, give me all your data now. Because otherwise, you're going to be in scientific hell. And this is obviously a little bit of an extreme proposition, but in some way it's, I hope, illustrating this tension that exists. Because of, obviously, on the other hand, the poor MD, he will never or she will never be able to process the data as good and as fast as the computer science guys. So the risk is real that they cannot get as much out of the data. Now, where does this leave us? I think that the current trend I was seeing over the last HBMs towards a more moral stand on data sharing, and the trend towards seeing problems mainly in the infrastructure, is going to lead into a dead-end street. Because it's not only about the infrastructure. And it won't get better by applying more pressure. But we need to find ways to actually see what's at stake for both sides and try to develop ideas, try to develop ways. I have some ideas, but I want to discuss that also with my co-discussants and with the crowd. What would be a way to get people to share data without the moral argument? And yeah, maybe I just hand over to Xenia. You're an MD yourself. How could people like, well, most in the open science room, I guess, how could they make you happy and feel that it's worthwhile for you to share the data?
Yeah. So actually, I have to say I agree with some points of view. So especially in those large multi-center studies, I have been part of them, and I was acquiring data for many years. And actually, I don't have the incentive anymore to do that because I'm not on any publication of. So I don't have any authorship for the amount of work I put in. So now I'm more a data consumer myself, and I apply for data processing of the HCP, of the ETNI project, and I don't see many incentives for myself to participate in those large-scale studies. And this is, of course, bad because I think we need more qualitative data to advance the field. But,
well, can that be the solution? Just everybody deals or uses the HCP data set? I mean, it's great. We have this data project, HCP, Biobank, NKI, and I think on the normal brain mapping side, that gets us quite far. But where do we go on the clinical side? I think that's the key problem.
Yes.
Well, maybe let's hear Pim first.
Yeah, my view on this, I mean, we have the same problem. That's almost a daily discussion I have with researchers and radiologists, for instance. The way we are trying to handle this is that there now is a large initiative at our hospital to set up a hospital-wide data infrastructure. But the main problem is, I think, has all to do with regulation. The law basically doesn't allow you to share patient data because that's a second problem. The doctors need all the patient information and the researchers are not allowed to get this data. So we have to be very careful how we store this data and how we are sharing it with others. So we are going to set up basically a clinical data center, which is we have the PACS system in the hospital, but it will be mirrored and will also include all the rules and regulations that apply to handling clinical data. Maybe that's one of the solutions, and then people have to really make a request to the ethical committee to access this data. It's not allowed to really share it very publicly. And the other point I want to raise, maybe that's also in line with your point, Simon, is that clinical data is very, very heterogeneous. So you cannot simply pull a number of scans and request 10 scans of MS patients, whatever. But they all need the patient information as well. So the other clinical data is very important with this with the imaging data. So I don't know how we should share this information. That's
it's actually thank you for raising that again, because that's in itself a double issue again. The one aspect is, and I can massively highlight it, it's metadata as well. It only gets really effective if you have a lot of metadata.
Exactly.
And some of that is the clinical metadata that's already in the systems. But let's be honest, most clinical research really needs dedicated data, metadata, behavioral data, tests, clinical scores, and so on top of it. And that is a lot of work. And I just want to pick up something here from the chat stream, because several people have commented that why should students acquire the data, and shouldn't there be a dedicated data collection job or something like this? Sure. In my view, that would make the problem only worse. Why is that? Because it costs money, substantial money. That money is gonna be somewhere with the clinical PI, with the clinical chair. And let's say these people are usually those that are least inclined to give out something without a benefit for themselves. So if you invest money into it, you feel even more that it belongs to you. You own the data. And again, it's not just that that people need to be approached, people need to be scanned, but it's in particular also all the metadata acquisition, all the behavioral testing. And there's a lot of practical things we can recommend there. And I would wholeheartedly agree. having students be poor labor is not per se a good idea, although I would say having first-hand experience in data acquisition is relevant. Yes, no researcher owns the data. That's the Open Science Room view. Talk to your chair of neurology at your university. They may have a very different view on the thing. Yeah. I know it. I know all about this. That's what I'm saying. I'm now in the discussion, flipping sides quite happily. But that was exactly my point. It is the reality, in particular in the clinical systems, that people have a much more ownership and investment-oriented view. If I acquire $1 million to hire people to collect the data, I have the say over the data. And maybe Pim, come back to your ethics point. I feel that ethics is being used a lot as a shield or a wall to not share data. I mean, it's so easy. If I have a lot of money and if I have access to patients, I'm just forgetting to have data sharing in the consent form. And oh, sorry, yeah, no, I would love to share the data with you. Unfortunately, for ethical reasons, I'm not allowed to.
Yeah,
I think just to add, like I've also, so my last 2 postdocs have also been in psychiatry. So I've worked with patients with bipolar, anxiety, and depression and things. So I'm a little distance away from actual clinical interaction, but I know the struggles of gaining clinical populations. And one thing that, like, in addition to everything that we've discussed, and I'd love to come back to all of the points, is that the relationship as a researcher, a clinician or not, that you have with patient populations, in my experience, feels slightly different to the relationship you have with a healthy control population. So all participants are difficult to recruit, but when you're specifically targeting people who are experiencing depression, you're so close to their experience and you're working so hard to get them to trust you and to get them to give up their time and energy to this project that you feel you've got a real responsibility for looking after them. And as we've seen in the data protection, like the whole data discussions that we've had on the first day, as neuroscientists or researchers of any kind, we don't understand like data protection and how we can safely share our data. So how are we going to communicate that to a group who we've got a real strong interest in protecting and looking after? So I think one thing that as like data scientists or non-clinicians we could be focusing on is remembering that it's not only us that needs to understand the data sharing process and the extra ethics of working with patient populations, but we also need to be able to communicate that to our populations and potentially vulnerable populations as well. So we need the whole clinical system to trust that we know what we're doing with the data and we're doing everything we can with their best interests at heart.
Just as a little add-on to that, or maybe an emphasis, I think as a data scientist, you see it as a data point. It's just one object. But as a clinician, you see it as a person. And I think that makes a lot of difference. And I think also this closer relationship is, well, maybe Xenia can comment on that, is also one of the reasons why you're less happy to share, because you're also emotionally invested, not just financially, but also emotionally to some degree. Xenia, how do you see this?
So I have currently conducted a study with patients with ALS. So it's a very severe disease, and I think it's very valuable that those patients dedicate the small time that they have left in their lives to research. So it's not for them, it's for the next generation. So they will not benefit from the current research anymore due to the short lifespan. And my experience, those patients participate in those studies because we as clinicians have done something for them, we have invested our time for them, we have treated them well, and they want to give something back to us. So it's a direct favor to us clinicians why they participate in those studies, because we have a very strong relationship. And I don't think that they would be as motivated to participate in the research if just some random researcher sorry, I just also exaggerated with some random researcher came along and said, oh, I need some data for my machine learning model. I'm not really interested in ALS. I just want to promote my toolbox and just need any data. I don't care about the disease, and probably my research will not have any impact on ALS at all. Please spin my research. I don't think it will work that way. And from what I have observed in OHBM, many studies are not directly aiming at patients' benefit, but just to advance some methods. So I see why clinicians and some patients are not interested in participating in that research, because it will not have an impact in their lives. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Somewhere I love your slip of tongue about the random researcher, because that is a big part of what clinicians and patients feel.
Yes,
it's
yeah.
just
I'm just
somebody
saying
who wants to try something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
right.
researchers really state why they are interested in the data and what would be the impact, apart from some general, we advance the methods, but they always write in their grant proposals, and that's not really what they're interested in. And some researchers even say clearly, I don't care if it's used for what I do, I'm just interested in this mathematical model of so-and-so.
May I just make a kind of a bit snarky comment? I'm just reading the chat at the same time. There's a lot of discussion about data quality, of fairness to students, of more on data quality and how to best acquire it. I haven't really seen one comment yet that makes a suggestion of how to make data sharing more palpable to clinicians. I mean, we've talked a lot about now how clinicians are involved in it, how much work it is, and why they are not particularly happy to just give it away for free, potentially hurting their own career chances. And again, remember, career chances here means something different. These are often not researchers. They are people that just need to do research for some time to get some degree and then go off to private practice. They're not interested in your greater good of advancing some machine learning algorithm. So how can we bridge the gap? How can we help these people commit also to sharing data? Because we all agree that obviously on the moral side, they need to.
I think Katja made the point earlier about more collaborative work. So I don't believe that clinicians and data scientists should be separate. So one thing that I've noticed going to sort of theme specific meetings or like British Psychiatry Association and stuff is there's not a lot of even kind of pushing any kind of boundary brain imaging. People are doing imaging, but it's pretty like standard stuff. So I think as a imaging society, we should be working harder to integrate ourselves and like in a co-production kind of way, not just like give me your data and I'll analyze it better. It's like, okay, what's your research question? Because they understand the patients and the disease and disorder much better than we do. And we perhaps understand the methods in a different way than they do. So we should be working together. And I think that's, it's probably on both sides, but if we want to elevate this work by introducing open practices and making nice, cool machine learning algorithms, we need to do some kind of like ambassador type work, like actually reaching out to these communities and finding out what we could offer and where the skill gaps are. And there are tons of skill gaps.
Well, now let me be a bit provocative. I actually love this session because now I can be the bad guy.
Yeah, do it.
Well, if you want to do something good for them, give them a first authorship in a high impact journal. That's what they need.
Right.
They don't really care about well, again, I'm exaggerating, but just helping them with doing some machine learning stuff and showing them data management and making them feel part of the community, you're looking at the wrong incentive structure. Right. They need papers, and if they get the papers, they're done with research. And again, I'm also, reading here a little bit, it should be made illegal. It's just not possible. As a clinician, you always have the last laugh, because in the end, you can always retreat on the ethics, privacy, legal restrictions, and that's it. So I don't think that the this sort of moral argument. It's really about how can we motivate people to share data? How can we motivate it without pressuring them, but actually incentivizing them? Pim, do you have ideas?
Yeah, I think, Xenia, you made a good point in the collaboration parts, but I find it's always very difficult to get clinicians and researchers on the same level, because researchers are always aiming at the stars, and a clinician wants usually a solution to a daily problem, a very simple problem, a very simple solution, but it has to be robust. And I think that's if you can convince the clinician that you have the solution and that it works in 90 or 100% of the patients, then they are extremely happy. But if you come with a solution that's maybe working in 10 years, or we don't really know what it does, or then there's no point in involving them in research. But yeah,
don't confuse MDs with grant agencies or societies. The individual MD that is actually taking care of the patients and trying to get the data. I don't think many of them actually realistically think about we have a robust solution, because in some way that would even be a threat to them. If there would be a really good automated system, as a radiologist, why would I acquire data if that is used to train a system that replaces me? Again, exaggerating.
Yeah, exactly. But the
there was
workload.
also the comment about outreach, and I think this nicely shows the different alignment and incentive structure. Like, we are now increasingly incentivized to do outreach, to get some recognition for community engagement and so on. If I'm a junior doctor at a university hospital, outreach is just not part of my job description. In fact, I may get into trouble with the more senior clinicians if I do any outreach on my own. In fact, I will most likely get in trouble if I do any outreach.
Like patient involvement outreach, or do you mean like community building?
Both science and patients. Both science and patients. It's really a much more hierarchical structure. So from that perspective, I don't think I like the ideas with credit, contributor roles, and so on. But similar to the idea of the impact factor being a problem and so on, all of these solutions require big changes to the entire landscape. Just to give you an example, most departments in Germany get extra money, extra budget based on the impact factors of their publications. So if I, as a clinical PI, give away my data, or if I just milk out a bunch of publications from that, the one actually gives me hard money in my institutional budget. The other one gives me some fluffy outreach, I'm doing good in open science. That's malpractice, as Roberto said, yes, potentially, but it's actually the standard at, I think, virtually all German universities.
And not just Germany. I know, like, PhD students, the programs that you can't graduate until you've got a certain number of papers and a certain impact factor. So it's all over.
Right. Again, that's common.
Yeah.
And Phil, I agree. We should not support that system. We should not support that system, but I think we also need to acknowledge that we cannot start as a small pocket of people living in a bubble that pretends the outside world is not happening, because it is happening.
So one thing that I'm sure there are others, but I want to highlight a project that I know about, Dementias Platform UK. So this is an online platform where different institutions and stuff and different research groups deposit data that's about dementia. And there's standards about the data that goes in there. And in order to access it, you have to go through like it's like a virtual desktop that you get. So the data is all kept in one place. The data never moves. So like patients are protected, but you get a virtual desktop to access it and work with the data and stuff. So this, I think, is one way that we can improve or the sort of help bring value to this, what we're establishing. Like, so this kind of big consortia projects, like there's a lot of neuroinformatics and informatics behind it, and that's essentially what we're saying we can bring to this community, is like we can bring our tech skills and we can bring our open science. So perhaps what we need is more examples of this, where it's like disorder specific big data projects where there's high impact papers are coming out of it, maybe with lots of authors rather than one first author that's gonna get some credit out of it. So maybe it's just a matter of time. Like, I completely agree and understand that we are working with the system that we've got, and maybe there's a bit of trickle down, and we're starting to see the beginning of it. You know, we've got HPC and Biobank, but what we need maybe is more data systems that are specific to clinicians, where they can see the benefit, everything's been worked out for them, and they know that they're going to still get the credit that they need.
I think that's one part of it. I completely agree with many of the sentiments that are being raised here. And yes, we should not support the system. And yes, it is a very suboptimal way of organizing research. Again, there are two things to keep in mind. One is the incentive structure for the individual. And the incentive structure for an individual junior clinician is different from a junior researcher, because there's a lot of people that need to do research to some point when they're at university hospitals, but really they are not generally interested in the research. It's just a thing they need to check off. Publish some papers, get some advanced degree to it, and that's it. So here I would guess that the incentive structure again needs to be recognized, and maybe then the goal is to have enough acknowledgement for that work to help those people that don't ultimately want to be in research and ultimately caring about the research really itself, that they still feel they get their time's worth from it. That's the individual incentive structure. And Xenia nicely illustrates the opposite of that in her opening statement, which is you contribute a lot of data, and I think you haven't advanced much in terms of rehabilitation as a result of that. Yeah, no, right, that's the point. So you're actually a nice example of how idealism causes work without getting any benefit out of it. Would you agree?
Yeah, and especially one has to consider that I did most of the work in my free time. So I have my full-time clinical job with
I'm sure she'll.
Oh, it just started to get interesting.
Yeah, didn't it?
Okay, well, Xenia can share.
So, like the clinicians are so bad researchers, they do bad statistics, but one has to consider the situation of many clinicians, and it would be very bad if they would be excluded from the research process, because it's valuable to have the clinical opinion and the clinical question in the research project.
Right, so the individual incentive, but then and also is the institutional incentive. And again, I enjoy the devil's advocate role here. For many senior clinicians, advancing science also is not necessarily the main incentive they align their work on. And again, it's okay, because they are not primarily scientists, they are clinicians. And I want to go hand over to Pim, but before that, I'm smiling slightly at the chat, where again, everything is dealing with technical questions. cybersecurity, central sharing, decentralized sharing, and so on. It really, I think, highlights so nicely the problem that that we are all in. It's really always going into the technical space, whereas we need to consider stronger how to get people on board. Tim, maybe you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can only agree with Xenia's statements. I mean, we see it every day in the hospital that for junior doctors and even for more senior researchers, it's extremely difficult to get enough time to do their research. They have to usually do 100% clinical work, and then in the evening, or research for doctors almost seems like a hobby or something you can do on the side.
That's all extra time.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous situation, because for the quality of the research, it doesn't really help if you don't give doctors the time to do proper research. But I think, yeah, if you look at the chat, I mean, it's almost anti-clinician, but you have to remember that these people take care of patients, and that the data that is collected, it's patient data, and it's used to help people, and the quality of the data is not collected data is often, it's used for diagnosis, so it's not tailored towards your research, and it's not needed to be tailored towards your research. So if I just acquire a 2D T2 turbospin echo, whatever, low resolution, it's very good for the doctor, but it's not good for your advanced algorithm. And of course, we could scan much higher quality data, but you have to remember that a patient is not able to be in the scanner and to lie still for 1 hour because you, as a researcher, want to have this very high quality data. It's not needed. We want to be as efficient as possible in the radiology department. And also, yeah, it's extremely difficult to get high quality, or what you as HBM researchers consider high quality data is not the same as radiology or radiological high quality data. I think that's the key point as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is another. Well, I have some views on that as well, because I think we should probably downgrade our data quality to research to clinical quality to make an impact.
Yeah.
And rather develop algorithms that work on clinical data rather than develop algorithms that work on HCP. Oh, somebody has a lawnmower in the background. I don't know. So let me ask a more provocative question here. That's more going towards the chat. Would you team up with a clinician that says, you can have my data, but first you analyze a data set completely for me, you do all the analysis, but I'm going to be the first author and you're going to be number 2 or 3 on the author list. But if you do that for me, then I give you my data. Because that's actually what you're asking the clinicians to do. Do the data, and you're becoming the first author.
That's a good point.
Some of the like 56 people in the authorships are very real. They determine your career. And it's unfortunately also happening for a while. Who would do that? Who would completely analyze the data set, maybe help write a paper for a clinician so that they can get their first authorship, and then you can have the data?
I've been surprised at how authorship is handed out in different, like the different institutions that I've worked in. Like, I know people who have done tons of work on a project and only been given, like, because they didn't write the abstract. And then when I've looked at some journals how to assign authorship, it's like the person who writes the abstract is the one that should be a first author. Like, we need to have, like, I know the credit system and like that, we kind of throwing that in there as a bit of a joke, but we really need to think again about how we're valuing the different contributions, because this is what we're saying, like, whose contribution is most valuable to this? Is it the clinician who spent X number of years in medical school, who's worked with these patients, developed these relationships, and actually managed to get them into the scanner? Or is the contribution that is the computational one, is that the most valuable? who wins this fight of first authorship. And I think that, I mean, it might be going a bit deep, but I think that is how we like put computational skills on a pedestal, and anything that is like a soft skill or like a, you know, a less not a computational skill is less valued.
Massively. I think that's a worry I have a bit about OHBM at the moment. It's all about computational skills, which I like, but it's also putting us into a very particular corner, because it would be fine if we would be all about, if it would be a computer science conference where we're caring about the brain, and there's a good proportion that cares about translational research. And we cannot at the same time make arguments about advancing the good for the patient and at the same time valuing computational skills much higher than clinical, behavioral, all of these aspects. Well, data sharing is good for the patients. I've seen that in a couple of comments also earlier. Does anybody really believe what we currently doing is helping any patient in the next couple of years?
Yeah. That was my point previously. So, and I don't think many of the researchers are even interested in making some useful research. So sometimes I ask them, OHBM, what is the, yes, I know you are, but sometimes I ask them, the poster session at the OHBM, what's the benefit of the model? And they say, oh, I don't care, I just want to try out my model. I think it's interesting. And being interesting is good enough for them, but sorry, you cannot hear me well?
That's much better, thank you.
Okay.
But I think that's just because that's the conference OHBM is. Like, it's primarily a methods conference. You know, you go to like a disorder specific thing, and there is much more emphasis on what it. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But this is my point about more collaboration and less silos of skills and interests.
Right. And again, I think the solution, if we want to achieve really an advancement on the practical side, is twofold. One is stronger collaborative effort, and the second is a more honest, let's say, view on the timeline. And that is not if I go to a patient and say, I'm like, your scan will help treat depression, and then it should need to be clear, it's like maybe in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And and it's not unlikely that the methodology that will actually be helpful is not even invented yet. And so the number of clinical abstracts still is high. I think it's a good point that was just raised here. It's second only to methods, really, in terms of the number of posters at OHBM, and that's been going on for years and years and years. It's always been roughly a third of the posters is clinical. And so I think we need to consider that seriously. And I, again, long-term, no question, credit and other forms must be the way forward. But maybe the German medical system is about as conservative as you can get in the world. But I'm not seeing it in my professional lifetime that we will fully have evaluations based on the credit system. It will take decades. So yes, we should foster it, and I think it's developing. But what I would really, again, think we need to realize is that computational skills and data acquisition, in particular on the clinical side, are equally important pillars. So we cannot really ask people to freely share their work for the benefit of those that have the other skill set. again, the equivalent would be you analyze my data, and I get the paper, and then you can have it later. That would be a fair give and take. Yes, I think that's a good question from Stefan here. Practical steps. Maybe I'll first hand over to Pim, then Xenia, and then I also have some ideas.
Practical steps, yeah. As you said, I think you should indeed work at some kind of system where there's a benefit for both parties.
Change the good term.
I can also imagine splitting things up. Of course, you have a clinical paper and a methods paper. I mean, the clinical paper, the doctor is the first author, and on the methods paper, the researcher, let's say. But on a larger scale, I think it's not. There's a fly here. Maybe investing like we are planning to do in data warehouses or data storage or data infrastructure on a hospital level, where everything is already taken care of, all the ethical and privacy stuff, and then researchers can access the data. I think that's maybe with a, how do you call it, a delay of a couple of years, because the clinician needs to use the data first, and then after a couple of years, it can be open to other researchers. Maybe that's one part of the solution as well.
Yeah, I think I very much like the, and actually I've lived the idea of this collaborative work, so where you have the clinician and the researcher both doing the work together and then sharing authorships or permuting them in successive papers. I think that's very good on a local scale. I think it's, and with local, I don't mean physically local, but point-to-point collaborations. It doesn't get us much closer into the, we pull data from many sites. And in that respect, I think, honestly, that the Enigma model, for all the critique you can have on that, is actually something that may be some way forward. We're seeing it in clinical trials a lot. We're seeing it in larger clinical studies. That basically, maybe the new normal is 100+ people on the author list. Because nobody is really, like, it isn't anybody's pain to have 100+ people on the author list, right? So maybe that's some way forward. Xenia. Well, just seeing here in terms of UK Biobank and other things here. Yes, sure. If you find somebody who's paying the amount of money that the UK Biobank costs, everybody would be happy to acquire the data. And we just need to find somebody to shell out double-digit millions, and that would be good. I mean, I think that's another undervalued solution. Get away with the small-scale clinical research. Just have a massive funding initiative that acquires all the data all of us need in the future. May I be a little bit skeptical here? And that's, if you look at some of the large EU consortia on clinical scannings, clinical brain imaging, there are many people, there are many million euros, and the data is shared within the consortium. And we plan to maybe potentially share it later with the broader crowd. But you know, ethics and legal and maybe we can do it, but we are not sure about that. Yeah, Emergent is a good example. It's as many of the consortia, it's mainly a closed club, and you, in most cases, I'm not sure about Emergent, but in most cases, you need to be part of the club by contributing your own data in order to also get access to the other data. Okay, Xenia, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I like the idea of strengthening the collaboration between like data providers, such as clinicians, and people who are more focused on data analysis, by maybe like having a marketplace where there's a clinician who has a specific question and looks for someone who has the method to solve the question, or something like that, to enable new collaborations. And I think that would increase the motivation to share the data, if there would be like a specific project for that. Of course, it doesn't solve the general problem, but might be a first step.
Yeah, I think the data set publications is also a good aspect. The poll. Oops.
Oh no, all good. Just
okay.
Okay. I'm pleased that people are responding well.
Okay. Good.
So
yeah,
just a point of admin housekeeping. We're happy to. No, it's fine. We're happy to run on until the end of the hour. So the next session is due to start at the end of this hour, the start of the next, and we'll need to do a little bit of background just to sort of switch some stuff. But I think we're wrapping up nicely. So let's just carry on for a few more minutes. And I love Xenia's like marketplace idea. How cool would that be? Like, here is what I can bring to the table. What can you bring to the table?
And I think that would go a very long way. And in fact, if there's one outcome that I would love for this discussion that everybody hopefully agrees with, well, maybe not agrees, but at least accepts it, is that this kind of open science needs to be a give and take. We must get away from the current model, and hopefully I can get away with criticizing the Open Science Room in the last couple of years. Well, I'm remote, so that's good. We must get away from the moral point, like you have to share the data. It's unethical not to share. You're a bad person if you don't share. We need to engage into this marketplace, into this give and take model, where it's really exchange of goods and services that can be setting up a pipeline for somebody so they can then publish their first author paper, and you as a pipeline developer are somewhere on the author list. But it can be also on the other side that you have a data set and you make it available to somebody, and then you're also somewhere on the author list. Yeah. And I personally believe that this kind of trade model where different things are being offered and consumed, that would make it a lot more palpable for clinicians, because then they would feel as being equally important partners in the discussions, not the bad guys that need to behave correctly. No. And just coming back to the owner perspective, I think the owner perspective is tricky, because in some way you could also make the same argument for algorithms. If you're being paid on a public grant, then basically all of the methods you develop are public goods, as in the same way as the data that you acquire while being on a grant. So I think we should somewhat separate, or even let's say factor out this legal versus perceived ownership. I think we hopefully can all agree, if I did work on something, even though I'm paid by the taxpayer, if I did work on something, if I developed the method, if I scanned or recruited patients, I still feel it's my data, it's my algorithm. Again, we can have a lot of legal arguments. Feel agreed. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, whatever I produce, I'm pretty sure my university owns it. Don't they own the IP and everything over everything?
Well, it gets tricky. It gets tricky with IP, and it gets even worse if it's a private university, because it's again not that straightforward. So I would really, let's say, be careful on the legal / moral side of ownership, like who owns something, if there's a taxpayer money involved in the background of it. Let's be honest, I think all of our salaries, like all 61 people, are probably paid by some public or public-private, like US university institution. If not, we wouldn't be here, because we would actually be working if we're working for a pharma company. Yeah, non-trivial for research industry collaborations, of course. Yeah. That's another side. If we make all the data public, all the code publicly available, and then Novartis or Pfizer takes it, runs it through their database, and then generates 1 billion, is that morally good? It's open. I think that's hopefully what this session really convinced at least some of you about, is we need to have this marketplace. We need to have a trade of goods and services, collaborations, a platform for collaboration, but also the intention to collaborate as an exchange, like take and give from both sides. And this will get us much further than any sort of more moral or legal argument. Maybe Pim and Xenia also for some parting words, because we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah. Simon, do you think sorry. Simon,
no, go ahead.
Sorry, I think I have a delay in the video. Simon, do you think such a marketplace would be possible to be set up within the OHBM infrastructure anyhow? Just as a pilot thing?
Well, there will be too long on the time scales, but like for now, I think there are 2 aspects of marketplaces. One is one that is really just like a forum, more or less.
Yeah, something like that.
And one that there are 3 levels. One is just a forum. The second one is a forum plus some maybe GitHub or something like this. The third is forum and data repository, so that the data is already guaranteed in the repository when you start negotiating. And the fourth would be, actually it's 4, data and compute infrastructure that are part of the marketplace. So you don't even have to download the data, because you can run it actually in the marketplace. I think OHBM would probably be a good one for the first, maybe good for the first and second. I see it not optimally positioned in number 3 or 4, because that's gonna cost tons of money.
Yes.
Pim?
Okay, at that point, if
Pim needs to have a
please,
chance.
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No, I think it's an excellent idea, this marketplace. I will start it on a local level already and see what happens if doctors can be interested in such a model. Yeah, very interesting.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, then
Bang on
I
time.
think
Thank
we're
you.
just in time. Excellent.
Yeah. And I also accidentally broke things. I didn't break it. But thank you so much for this discussion. I'm so pleased that the community has responded so nicely to it. And thank you, Simon, for leading this. It's such an important point. And
Thank you for the opportunity.
No, my absolute pleasure. And this is what we love about Open Science Room. It's we can all chat about things in a very friendly space. We all understand that we're all here just to kind of do the best that we can. And thank you for tackling what could be a potentially thorny subject and for doing it so professionally and sensitively.